This episode, we're going to be talking about the least desired, the least convenient, the most useful accessory in photography.
We will be talking about the three-legged thing.
Oh, hi. Hi, this is Roger. Greetings. Oh, man. Welcome to this episode of The Experienced Photographer. My fellow photographer, good friend, and director for this episode is Matt Rich.
Howdy, everyone.
In our last episode, we talked about depth of field. We discussed how to isolate an item with a narrow depth of field in order to be specific and isolate one thing. We also discussed how to use a wide depth of field in order to incorporate an entire situation. Now, these two things are often used techniques in photography, and I'm sure that you will be utilizing them in the future. Today, we're going to discuss the least desired, least convenient, and most useful accessory, and that's the tripod. Frequently referred to as the least desired because who wants to carry any extra weight with them? I mean, after all, more gear is more gear. It's also referred to the least convenient because it just simply, you have to deal with all that dangly three legs. Then also, the extra weight is a bothersome issue. I want to express here right now the 3 points that must be considered in using a tripod. Today's camera and lens combinations, in-body and in-lens stabilization electronics do make working without a tripod easier than it has ever been before. The gyroscopic stabilizers help eliminate the photographer's in-camera motion, and that's a very good thing. Today's new lens designs utilize aspheric correcting lens elements and wide aperture openings like f2.0, making it even easier to work without a tripod. They correct the aberrations from huge glass elements and allow faster and more convenient shutter speeds. Now, not every photographer has the same abilities or the same needs or the same desires at the same time. And they may reach a tripod sooner than a more stable younger person. But when you need a tripod, you really need a tripod. And so that's why we're going to talk about this today. Let's get off with why we want to use a three-legged thing. Number one, long exposures and low light. We learned about long exposures when we talked about the exposure triangles a couple of lessons back. And we found that the three controls of the exposure triangle is shutter, aperture, and that controlled the camera. And we also have the ISO. Unfortunately, in any given scene, there's only so much light that you can work with. And as for the day as it goes along and falls to dusk, and you still need to be shooting inside or outside, either one, there might not be enough light available for your shot. So our biggest option here is to use low shutter speeds. And you go down to the slowest you can go without capturing unwanted motion in your shot. After shutter speeds fall below about a 60th of a second, camera movement becomes problematic. And that's whether you or the camera or all of the above or the subject motion is going. You need, of course, to reach for the tripod because blur is introduced by your hand, and that is not a good thing, and you end up with camera movement. Then there's the occasion where you want to see long exposure and subject movement. Yeah, that happens, and you can do that. But the camera must be steadied in order to make this desired motion happen. So let's take a few look at a few examples of some of Matt's work here. Long exposures for the desired movement of clouds is one of my exposures. This was shot in Capitol Reef, and I was up on the hill shooting down into the valley. It was a great shot, but as the clouds started soaring across and I could see them happening, that was all about the mood. And that's when I decided I needed to keep everything still except for the movement of the clouds. So onto the tripod you go, and you let the clouds flow, and you end up with something really exciting. Probably my number 2 reason for using a tripod is for self-portraits. Now, I may be fighting a losing battle. Seriously, if you want to take a decent photo of yourself, a tripod is going to give you a far better result than a simple selfie stick hanging out in front. I appreciate the ease and the use of a smartphone on a selfie stick. It is really speedy. You can upload to social media. You don't have to hand your camera off to some unknown person to get a shot. All of these factors are powerfully persuasive. However, you're somewhat restricted in terms of framing because you can't see what somebody else is doing for you. I remember doing this down in Carmel one time, and I was down by the lighthouse, and me and my sweetheart were standing there, and I was trying to get a picture, and a stranger walked up and said, "Can I take a shot for you?" And I says, "Oh, that would be ever so nice, thank you." Handed him the camera. He holds it up. He focuses or pushes the button. Here's me. Here's my sweetheart. Here's the lighthouse down there, and the lighthouse is perfectly in focus, and we're out of focus. You can't see what somebody else is framing for you. And with a phone, you simply just don't have the right lens choice absolutely available to you. Now, pretty much every modern camera has a self-timer function, which lets you press the button and take a picture after a set period of time that has elapsed. So putting the camera on a tripod means you get to have more creative control in your shot. You get better results, and you can do some really cool things. I've got a couple of mine here, and maybe Matt's got some of his as well to show today. I've got one in my super kilt, and it's pretty hard to frame up and do something like that unless you have a tripod. Now, also making multiple views. Almost every shot that I take at least 2. One horizontal for wall art and stuff that I do, and one vertical that fits a magazine column format for anything that I may have written. It's remarkably easy to accomplish this when the camera's on a tripod. Now, with the tools that I have, the camera can be unlocked by a simple latch and switched from horizontal to vertical in 2 seconds. No fidgeting, no realigning, no changing the tripod, no positioning of the head or anything else. Now, we'll get into tripod and tripod heads and what to look for in buying a tripod next week or on our next episode. And we'll discuss all of these things that you need to know. But number 4 is for landscape photography. Landscapes are, well, kind of one of my favorite. I think if you've been watching my work and seeing it on Facebook and viewing our vlogs, you'll notice that Matt and I both enjoy landscape. Now, landscape, it's really important to get enough depth of field, as we talked last week. And so often I'm using f11 or smaller f-stops. And this automatically begins to force you into longer and longer shutter speeds. So I want to be in that magic range from between 8 and 16 to make sure I get sufficient depth of field for what I'm dealing with. Unfortunately, those narrow apertures reduce all of the light, and so we need to increase the shutter speed or increase the ISO, one or the other or both. Since increasing the ISO is not my first choice, you guessed it, longer shutter speeds, meaning let's get out the tripod. I hope Matt has some good examples because he can put up here, because I've seen his work on his webpage. I've seen his work on gallery walls. I've seen his work hanging in people's houses. They're exquisite. And simply, most of this is done on a tripod. Now, number 5 is using camera filters. Back in the days when film was king, filters were really necessary for adjusting color balance and, in black and white, film contrast and control. Today we don't use as many filters as we used to. In digital imaging, we can get by without some of those, or we can do them in post-production. But I'll tell you right now that a polarizing filter is used to control glare or reflection and saturation in an image. It's a filter that must be rotated into its most effective position when it's installed on the camera. Now, that one filter is practically impossible to reproduce in post-production. So having the camera on a tripod with your composition fixed, with your focal length fixed, and then install your filter and rotating it to get the right combinations working is a real important thing. Another filter that I use a lot is a neutral density filter. These are used to increase shutter speeds intentionally. They will slow down a shutter speed to smooth out water so it appears less choppy and wavy. You can get a smooth, glassy surface. Waterfalls can become rather ethereal with selected ND filters, and they're available in many sizes, many styles and grades, from add +2 stops up to +10 stops. Now, 10 stops will really definitely require that you use a tripod to hold still. We also have graduated neutral density, or what they call split neutral density filters. They're often used to control contrast in a very bright sky. The filter itself has a dark band at the top and a clear band at the bottom, and you can adjust those up and down in front of your lens to block out part of the sky so that it will become darker and match the exposure for the foreground. Now, split ND, or neutral density, is a lifesaver in a lot of cases. And I really like those, and I use those. And you just simply have to have a tripod to do it. What I do is, go into live view, slide the filter in, and watch for when it blocks the sky and leaves the foreground in the right position. And off to the races you go, making exposures and compositions and shooting and having fun. Now, you maintain correct composition, but you mitigate the bright sky. And these filters are available in both an abrupt split or a graduated split, so that they just kind of blend in. Now, another great reason for a tripod is video work. And the more I work with video, the more I have found out if you got jiggly video, you really look like a rookie. You are really a million times better working with a tripod than wobbly video that screams amateur. Stabilizing your video with a tripod instantly makes you look more professional. And besides, you don't want your audience getting seasick. So that's important. Another thing I like to do, Matt and I were out last summer, and we were shooting out at the Bonneville Speedway out on the Salt Flats. We got out there about 1 or 2 in the morning and set up and caught the Milky Way in a full arch above the speedway out there. If you're going to do astrophotography, it's fun. And there's a lot of things that you can do. And they pose a rather unique challenge because the stars are only available when it's dark. And of course, when it's dark, that whole exposure triangle thing comes into view, and out you haul the old tripod. Now, we have to shoot both long exposures, and in most cases, with really high ISO and low apertures. You can do static shots of the Milky Way, or long exposures for wheeling stars across the sky, but you need the camera to be still, and this applies if you want to take pictures of the northern lights or something else. I've got a couple of examples here. I know Matt has done a lot of them. I've got one here that shows the stars up above us and our campfire going one night. I mean, what? It doesn't get any greater than this. Being out, having fun, shooting the stars, staying up at night and having a good laugh. But you need a tripod. Now, framing your shots. This is a little less concrete than many of the other reasons. However, it does make a difference in your photography. Have you ever had a camera in your hand and it just becomes so easy you pull it up to your eye and start pushing the button and shooting and firing away? And one of these new cameras that'll do 12 or 20 frames a second, you can blast through an entire video card in no time at all. But the problem is you're not even really thinking about what's going on. You're not thinking about your composition. You're not thinking about the subject matter. You're not thinking about what does this mean. Speed sometimes matters, and sometimes you just have to do it. But most of the time, working from a tripod allows me to use my eyes. Now, I can really slow down. I can look at the composition. I can study it on the back of the camera through the eyepiece or in live view. It's going to take a little longer, but it benefits the image because you can position the camera perfectly. You can level it. You can look around the edge of the viewfinder, make sure everything's clean. You don't have any extra sticks or branches or heads or telephone poles sticking out of somebody's head or anything. You can make your shot far better by standing on a tripod and working with it that way. In our experience, it seems to lead to more creative and better and sharper results. Number 9, if you want to do any special effects and your photography abilities increase and you desire to get into more complex things and you decide to take on HDR or high dynamic range photography or photo stacking. Now this is a good method of really increasing depth of field. It's absolutely imperative that you're on a tripod for these special effects. Now, if you're going to do merging, if you've got to take a panorama, for instance, and you want to stitch several together, I take the camera and you can put it this way horizontally and take a couple and make a panorama. But if I turn the camera up this way, I increase the height of my panorama and take a number of exposures overlapping slightly and then bring them back to the software in post-production and rejoin these babies and merge them, and I get great pictures. You can do all kinds of special effects as long as you're on a tripod and you can control what's going on. Now, number 10, as we talked about in earlier visits in our videos, shutter speed should be approximately 1 over the focal length that you're using. Now, if I'm using a 400 millimeter lens, I want to photograph birds, or I want to photograph a mountain that's far away, or I want to bring something in closer, cars speeding past, boats going, whatever it is. I know that I have a difficult time, especially as I grow older, holding a rather big or heavy lens. A 400 or 500 millimeter lens is almost impossible for me to hold still any longer. This is why I go to a tripod. Now, another thing is in macro photography, that really close up, getting into a flower and taking a look at the inside of the flower, getting a close up of a bumblebee without getting your nose stung. I use like 100 millimeter macro. That gives me enough standoff from the subject to the camera to not get stung, but 100 millimeter, and you're working very close distances, matter of inches. Any little movement becomes, what's the right word? It becomes annoying, and you can't stop it. You can't get a sharp, good picture. So put it on a tripod. It really makes a giant difference. Now, we'll look into different styles of tripods and heads in future videos. What to look for in purchasing a tripod. What are some of the good things to look for? Some of the things to avoid. And then we'll talk about tripod heads, which is a whole nother game. But if you like this information that we've given you today, and you find out that the three-legged thing maybe isn't such a creepy monster after all, give us a thumbs up. Send us your comments. Send us your questions. We love hearing from you. I try to incorporate the questions that I've received into our videos so that you get an answer that specifically fits you, your needs, and your work. And I love hearing from you, man. You're part of the club, and this is important to me. It's that I can communicate with you in some way that really makes a difference in your photography, my photography, our teaching, and our group together here on the web. Now, this is Roger and Matt signing out for now, but we really hope to see you out there soon. So have a great time, and we'll see you at our next vlog. Thanks, folks.